Mr. Brodess's will stated that none of his slaves was to be sold south. Rit and Ben were happy to learn this, but Minty still worried. The word of a white man on paper didn't count much for when it came to black people. No one really knew what this new master, a minister, called Dr. Anthony Thompson, might do. The wound on Minty's head had healed, but strange dreams still troubled her. They seemed so real, like visions. She told the other slaves about her dreams. They listened. All the slaves admired this brave girl who stood up to an overseer. The nickname Minty seemed too childish for a woman of courage. People began to call her Harriet. When she was fit to work again, Harriet and her father Ben were hired out by Dr. Thompson to John Stewart, a builder. At first, Harriet was put to work cleaning his house, but after a few months, she asked Mr. Stewart if she could work in the fields. He agreed. Stewart knew Harriet was strong. He'd seen her carry huge logs to the fireplace, and he wasn't paying much for Harriet. If she could work like a man, cutting trees and splitting timber, it would save him the money of hiring a more expensive male slave. Harriet proved her worth as a strong field worker. In fact, she worked so well that Stewart allowed her to hire her time. This meant that Harriet could take some extra jobs from other people on her own. She had to give Stewart part of the money she earned, but she was also allowed to keep some for herself, too. For 6 years, Harriet labored for John Stewart. She never suspected that the hardship she endured and the discipline she learned were preparing her for the future. Harriet was proud to be working with her father. Ben was in charge of the slaves who cut down trees for Mr. Stewart. He was a trusted slave, well known for his absolute honesty as well as his hard work. But Ben could see that Harriet did not act like a slave. He knew that in her heart she longed for freedom. So without ever saying a word, Ben began to teach her things as they worked in the woods. He taught her to imitate bird calls. He taught her which berries were safe to eat and which were poisonous. He taught her to travel through the woods without making any noise at all. At night, he showed her how to find the North Star. It always pointed to the north. Night travelers could keep the North Star in sight and be sure that they were heading north. He showed her how to run her hand along a tree trunk, feeling for moss. Moss grew only on the north side of trees. If a night was cloudy and no stars could be seen, the moss could guide a traveler north as well as a star. In Harriet, Ben had a willing pupil. Harriet found some satisfaction in plowing the fields and cutting timber for Mr. Stewart. But she resented it terribly when he brought his white guests out to the field to show off her strength. He ordered his overseer to harness Harriet like an ox to a heavy, stone-filled boat. Then the guests would gasp with astonishment as Harriet walked along the edge of the river, dragging the boat behind her. Mr. Stewart's little shows made Harriet feel no better than a beast, but there was nothing she could do about it. In 1844, when Harriet was about 23 years old, she met a man named John Tubman. He was tall and handsome. He was always whistling cheerful tunes. John was black, but he wasn't a slave. He'd been born free. His mother and father had belonged to a master who had died. The master's will had freed all his slaves. Although John was free and Harriet was a slave, he asked her to marry him. Harriet accepted. She loved John deeply. She began to work very hard making a fine patchwork quilt for their marriage bed. It was the only beautiful thing Harriet ever owned. When they were married, Harriet Tubman took her quilt and went to live in John's cabin. John never worried about anything. He seemed happy with their lives just the way they were, and he liked the extra money that Harriet was able to bring home from her hiring out her time. But Harriet worried. Her husband was free, yet she was still a slave. The plantation wasn't making enough money. Soon Harriet knew Dr. Thompson would start selling his slaves. What if he decided to sell her? Harriet told John her worries. She told him the nightmares of slave traders coming with whips and chains. She wanted him to run away with her, to follow the North Star to freedom. But John shrugged her worries away. He was happy where he was. They had a little money, didn't they? And a cabin of their own. Not all Harriet's dreams were bad. Some were dreams of freedom, visions of flying free over the cotton fields and mountains. As she flew in her dreams, she came to a wall that she couldn't fly over. Just as she was about to fall, she saw women all dressed in white on the other side of the wall. They held out their arms to her. They wanted to pull her over the wall to freedom. When Harriet told John about her flying dreams, he said they were crazy. At last, he grew tired of hearing them. He said that if she tried to run away, he would tell the master. Harriet was shocked. Would her own husband betray her? He must have been joking. She looked up into the eyes of this tall man, whom she loved so much. There, she saw only a cold glare. Harriet was more hurt by John's words than she'd ever been by Susan's whip. From that moment on, Harriet was afraid of John Tubman.